Okay, welcome to the last video in this series on the Subtractor. There's a couple of areas I haven't covered. I'm going to do my best to go through them. There again is more information in the manual about it, and it may take you several times of kind of reading through it and experimenting with it to kind of really get to grips with some of these things. The first thing is the velocity section, because the Subtractor, as you play it normally, is not touch sensitive. Okay, even though you're playing on a touch sensitive keyboard, that's because nothing's been set in the velocity controls to make it touch sensitive. If I want to make it touch sensitive, I have to turn the velocity control on the amp, the volume level, to the right. Okay, and it becomes more touch sensitive that way. Okay, there's quite an odd thing. If you go the other way and you go to minus thing, it seems to become, if you play it softer, the louder it is. Okay, so the harder I play the keys, the quieter they are. The softer I play the keys, the louder I get. Okay, so play it loud or hard, play it softly, and you get really loud notes. Okay, so that's about the amp. This applies to every other parameter that's on here. Some of them need to be set up on the actual synthesizer. But for instance, you can hear that the filter envelope will open more if I go to plus that way, and it will open less depending on the velocity if I go the other way. Okay, I can also control the amp, the filter decay in relation to velocity. Okay, by going that way or that way. Okay, so I can make it more or less velocity sensitive. Okay, so it's like moving this around, really. Okay, there are also several other things you can do. One, if I turn the FM on, we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, you can make it more or less sensitive to what's called frequency modulation. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, just to give you a bit of a demonstration of how this works in the kind of principle of a patch and like running things through it. This is a simulation of a TB303 by Roland's Groove Box. And this is just a little pattern I've set up in C minor, okay, that's running through it. And I'll start to tweak some of these parameters on the velocity and amp and filter envelope and filter decay, and hopefully you'll see a bit more about what they're doing when you hear something playing. Okay, so take the filter down. Okay, you can hear it's less sensitive to the filter now. The filter's not opening as much. Okay. Filter decay, this is this button here. Again, it's like I could do that. Okay, but I can make it more velocity sensitive using this. It does a similar thing. Okay, and let's just add a bit of FM a minute. The same goes for the rest of these things. Okay, mix between the oscillators. Obviously you've got to have them on. Okay, amp envelope attack. Slow the attack down. Okay, and if I use phase, so hopefully that shows you some of the possibilities with this. Obviously, this is a bit more of a complicated combinator patch. I've got it going through a distortion unit, a filter, a reverb unit, and this matrix is triggering this through CV and gate. We'll have a bit more on that later. I'll explain how that works. But you can see what's happening here routing-wise is the audio is coming out of there into the filter. It's then going into the envelope, it's going into the distortion, then it's going into the filter, then from the filter are going into the reverb, and the reverb's taking you out, and then that's going into your mix. So you're going through all of these devices, and this is controlling this through CV and gate. This is what's going on down here. Okay, more on that later. Okay, back to the Subtractor. A couple more things that I didn't talk about just quickly. You've got some phase controls here. Now, if we go to the area in the manual that we need to look at, which is, let me see, no, back up to oscillators, phase offset modulation, there we go. Okay, you can see that what happens is you can offset the waveforms. That means you're in fact kind of duplicating, so it means you're making more than one sound out of this oscillator really, because you're offsetting them. You can either multiply them or subtract them. You can see this is the result of subtraction. You get like a pulse wave, and this is the result of multiplication. You get this odd wave, which is kind of a pulse wave with a sweep in the high frequencies. So if I demonstrate, I'll just go to multiplication and subtraction. This will create a type of pulse wave modulation. If you send the this to phase, the LFO2, okay, you can get it to modulate that for you. Okay. So really what these add is a different timbre, a different texture other than just using the filter, and you can use them on both. And you can start to get some really nice thick sounds, and if you detune them a bit as well, okay, so it's on 0, you don't get any phase offset, doesn't do anything. That knob doesn't do anything. The last couple of things are FM, frequency modulation. This tutorial is too short to go into it in huge amounts of depth, but I'll just explain a little bit about it. You have, in frequency modulation, if you go again in the manual, it tells you a little bit more about it. You have to activate the second oscillator because that's the one that's going to modulate the first oscillator. You've got oscillator 1 is the carrier and oscillator 2 is the modulator. Modulation just means to change something, same as an LFO, that's a kind of modulation. If we turn the second oscillator on, okay, and we're just going to change this into a low sine wave for a minute, okay, and I'm going to start putting the FM knob up. And I'm going to retune these again so they're not detuned. Okay. Turn that phase up. Okay, if I take it out by an octave, you can hear how much faster this waveform's getting because it's doubling in pitch. Okay, so start with down here, it's really acting like a low frequency oscillator, okay, because if I switch to that noise, that's what's coming out of that oscillator, you can't even hear it, okay, it's kind of, there's a little rumbly noise going on there, but not a lot, okay, but what it's doing is modulating this other one, okay, which is very much like using an LFO, a slightly radical LFO. Okay, so then if I take it up into the audible range, okay, so now we can hear it, okay, that's what it sounds like. Okay, it starts to produce a much different effect. Okay, and I keep taking it up. Okay, now that's using octaves, so it's fairly pleasant. You might not think so, but if we start to detune it by semitones, we start to get all sorts of odd noises. Okay, so this is one to experiment with and see what you make of it. It's really, you know, in the realms of 1980s electronic games like Pac-Man and things like that. There's a lot of FM synthesis used in there because that was kind of when it first started to appear in synthesizers. You've also got something called ring modulation. Again, this can add some really nice distorted kind of sounds. Okay, so that's something to use when you want something that's going to really distort the sound out. Again, you can read more about ring modulation. Ring modulation is basically the signal, one signal multiplying by another signal, and you get the sum and difference between the two signals. So, for instance, if you had like 300 hertz and 500 hertz, you'd have the sum of them, which would be 800 hertz, and you'd also have the frequency of the difference between them, which would be 200 hertz or 100 hertz difference. So those, then they all combine to make that sound that you're hearing. So depending again on what you do tuning wise, you can end up with some either quite harmonic sounds or kind of really dissonant sounds. Okay, that just about wraps it up. Again, you need to read the manual, you need to go through this, and you need to spend a lot of time experimenting with it. That's the only way you're going to get used to using it. I would say though that it can be a lot quicker to program your own things when you get used to it, rather than searching through hundreds and hundreds of patches trying to find the right sound, and then subsequently not being like quite happy with it because it's not exactly what you wanted. So even if you know how to adjust a patch and you know what you're doing with this, it can kind of you know, you can focus in on create your own sounds. Creating your own sounds will give you inevitably your own style, your own kind of sound when you're making your tracks, and that's really important because loads of people are using the patches, so it's another point in your originality, not just in the way you compose music. Okay, that's it for me for now.